American Electric Power is debuting the first ever large-scale deployment of carbon capture and storage technology at its 1,300 megawatt coal-fired plant in New Haven, West Virginia. Clean Skies Dan Goldstein got a first-hand look at this new CCS project. He's here with us now. And this plant is only a very first step for AEP.
That's right, Susan. And basically AEP is calling this a validation of the technology, which is a joint venture with the French company Alstom, which developed what's called the cold ammonia process. That's the key to separating the carbon dioxide into a liquid flue. Now, this plant will remove about 100,000 tons of CO2 from the air, but AEP is looking towards an even bigger leap. If carbon capture and storage, or CCS, ever becomes commercially viable, this giant power plant in West Virginia might be the reason why.
Our process starts at the outlet of the flue gas desulfurization system, which is the large stainless steel vessel. Coming out of the hood, you see two white ductworks leading to and from our capture facility.
Brian Sherrick runs American Electric Power's CCS test plant here along the Ohio River, where AEP is gearing up the first ever large-scale carbon removal and storage. This test rig, developed jointly with Alstom of France, is attached to a 1,300 megawatt coal-fired power plant built back in 1981. This plant uses more than 7,000 tons of coal a day and emits 8.2 million tons of CO2 each year. But if CCS works, plants like this one could see CO2 emissions drop by up to 90%.
We're sort of pushing the envelope and doing a 10-time scale-up. So we're trying to push the commercialization of the technology as fast as we can, with the goal of decreasing the energy demand as much as possible so that we don't have to replace that energy loss with other industry or other ways of producing the power, whether it be newer, more efficient coal plants or nuclear or gas.
But all that takes power, and lots of it. Just to remove 100,000 tons of CO2, it takes 1.5 megawatts, enough power to light thousands of homes. AEP plans next to build a CCS plant capable of removing 1.5 million tons of CO2. That plant will need more than 280 megawatts of power, or enough to power a small city.
Any of the CO2 capture processes require electricity and steam to work in the process. So one of the goals of this process, and one of the reasons we chose Alstom's chilled ammonia process, is it offers the opportunity to get the lowest energy demand to run the process. Commercially available CO2 capture processes are somewhere around 30% of the energy demand of what they're treating. The goal of the chilled ammonia process is to get down to 10 to 15%.
And once the CO2 is captured, it has to be stored. AEP is securing the CO2 in these wells here, drilled 1.5 miles deep into saline aquifers, deep enough not to be a threat to the water table and the surrounding community, the company says.
This area is 85 feet or above. The coal seams in this area are 200 to 400 feet, so we're injecting 1.5 miles underground, so there's several thousand feet of good cap rock between our injection reservoirs and the freshwater drinking zones or the coal seams.
AEP says this plant will be fully operational by 2015, and if that works out, it might be a good example of some of the so-called green jobs politicians have been promising. Not only will CCS provide construction jobs building the new infrastructure, but utilities will have to build essentially a new power plant within a plant, and that means people working around the clock to run them.
If CCS were to go on a commercial scale, we would have to build a control room like this, very similar. We would probably have to add 3 to 6 more people to run that control room in that process.
But AEP says it can't do it alone without the help of Uncle Sam. That's why this month the company asked for $334 million from the Department of Energy to help it develop the largest scale version of this plant.
We've got to figure out how to pay for this type of project. But really, I don't see how it can be done without help from the federal government. It's just very, very expensive. There's not a mandate to do it. Other power plants are not doing it, so it would put us at a severe disadvantage if we attempted to do it all on our own.
Now, as you saw there, Susan, the next step at the Mountaineer plant will be building a CCS facility capable of removing 1.5 million tons of CO2. While it's a big leap from the 100,000 tons at the demonstration plant you saw earlier, it's only about 18% of the emissions from that plant, and that plant emits about 8.2 million tons of CO2. So to get that 1.5 million tons removed, it's going to take 238 megawatts. That's enough power to power basically 200,000 homes. So just doing the math to get to that 90% emission target for a plant that size, it'll take a power source nearly as big as the coal power plant itself sent to the grid just to remove the emissions. So to get more efficient to make this work, basically they've got to cut down on the efficiency.
That certainly seems like a very tall order to try to remove that amount of emissions, the amount of energy it actually takes to do that. I mean, is that potential? I mean, that could potentially keep some projects from taking off? Or?
Well, that's right, and that's why really they are referring to this as the Manhattan Project and the Apollo Project. Failure to them is really not an option, because if they can't get the efficiency, get that squeezed down so that less parasitic power is going to the CCS rather than going to the grid, this isn't going to work.
Okay, Dan Goldstein, thanks. Fascinating series there.